In 2019, Avengers Endgame directors Joe and Anthony Russo announced that the first openly queer character in the MCU would be appearing in the upcoming film. And boy, did they deliver.
What did you talk about?
Same old crap, things have changed, and my job, his job, how much we miss the Mets. And he cried as they were serving the salads. And I cried just before dessert.
Do you feel f***ing represented yet? Marvel has been quite possibly the biggest pop culture leviathan for over 10 years, in a way that no other franchise has, permeating the cultural zeitgeist so deeply that even your boomer Aunt Linda from Michigan is at least somewhat familiar with the MCU oeuvre. At the time of this recording, we are up to 24 movies and counting, not including spin-off shows and other promotional materials. In all that time, we've had one nameless character who was on screen for less than a minute. When Supernatural is doing better than you in the diversity department, you know your franchise has issues. With the recently out of the closet Loki Laufeyson and the upcoming Eternals movies, it seems like the MCU is finally trying to get with the times. But I have to wonder, why has it taken 13 years to get here? And why are there so many stumbling blocks along the way? You may have heard this word thrown around in fandom spaces, but you may not know what it means. Queerbaiting, first coined in arguably the early 2000s, is described as a marketing technique designed specifically to draw in viewership from the LGBTQ+ community by hinting at but never explicitly showing queer characters or same-sex relationships on screen. Without actually canonizing the queerness, the showrunners don't have to worry about alienating the part of their audience that is uncomfortable with overt queerness in their media. Perfect example. One of the first trailers of the CW's Riverdale significantly featured a kiss between Betty Cooper and Veronica Lodge, but when the first episode of Riverdale was aired, the kiss scene in context was played for shock value, not because the show was actually exploring the possibility that Betty and Veronica might actually get together, or that either one of them is actually queer.
Check your sell-by date, ladies. Faux lesbian kissing hasn't been taboo since 1994.
The executives knew that including the kiss in the trailers would pique the audience's interest and draw in viewership. And it worked on some level because I know why that's why I tuned into the first couple of episodes, until I realized I was just being queer-baited and that Riverdale is an almost hilariously awful show.
In case you haven't noticed, I'm weird. I'm a weirdo.
Other franchises that have been accused of queerbaiting include Supernatural, Teen Wolf, Sherlock, Merlin, Once Upon a Time, Supergirl, the Fantastic Beasts movies, and the Star Wars sequels. There is a reason why a large portion of these fandoms are LGBTQ+ individuals, because something drew them in. Writers and actors will depict these characters in a certain way, leaning into this expectation of something being there, never follow through on it, and then turn around and tell the fans that they're delusional for putting together the clues that they knowingly put there to be found. Gaslight, gatekeep, girl boss. Actually, no, not that last one. Most of these writers are middle-aged men. But no one is out there doing it quite like the MCU. And from a comic company that has actually come a long way in queer representation, it's actually painful. Marvel Comics has billions of characters in its vast pantheon, and more than a few have identified as part of the Alphabet Mafia. Now, comics canon can be a little squirrely because of alternate universes and timelines, but here's a small sampling of canonically queer Marvel characters. Mystique, Northstar, Jubilee, Kitty Pryde, come on, her last name is Pride, Hulkling and Wiccan, Iceman, Shatterstar, Dakin, America Chavez, and of course, my boy.
He's got a nice pair of smooth criminals down under.
The X-Men trilogy of the early 2000s even leans into the idea of being a mutant as a metaphor for being a part of the LGBTQ+ community. There's the whole having to hide your real self from the world aspect, not being accepted by society, having to come out as a mutant to your loved ones.
Have you tried not being a mutant?
So yeah, queer themes in Marvel is nothing new. So, Disney. Hey bestie, I gotta ask, why so straight? Disney has its own interesting relationship with the gays. For one thing, gay people really f***ing love Disney if you haven't noticed. Especially Disney villains, which have their own subculture and gay community. Villains like Jafar, Ratigan, Scar, Governor Ratcliffe have all been described as queer-coded, and Ursula was famously designed after drag performer Divine.
Does blood turn you on?
It does more than turn me on, Mr. Vader. It makes me come.
I love how Disney has two queer-coded villains who both have rat in their name. Was that intentional? Yet, classic Disney movies are kind of the apotheosis of heteronormativity. We're just now beginning to explore same-sex relationships with Pixar's Luca. Elsa is still sadly in the closet. Generally, queer characters are relegated to subtextual queerness and secondary or even background character status. Disney has had about, 5 first gay characters now? Now that's what I call representation, with classics everyone loves like LeFou from live-action Beauty and the Beast, lesbian cop from Onward, Alfie from Cruella. He was in 3 whole scenes! And who could forget 2 frames of a lesbian kiss in Rise of Skywalker? Call the number on the screen and we'll include some guy from the Jungle Cruise movie for free! All for 69 easy payments of $420 per month. Call now! What the f*** am I doing? Director Taika Waititi famously tried to include a flashback scene in Thor Ragnarok in which Valkyrie, who is canonically bisexual in the comics, was shown to be in a romantic relationship with a woman. This scene was ultimately cut. MCU movies are among Disney's biggest sources of profit because they appeal to such a wide demographic. And as we know, movies about queer superheroes just don't draw in audiences. Oh, oops, it seems I've accidentally put the box office numbers for Deadpool on the screen. Don't look at that! Incidentally, Deadpool came out in 2016, the same year that the hashtags Give Elsa a Girlfriend and Give Captain America a Boyfriend trended on Twitter. Many people headcanoned Steve Rogers as bisexual and wanted to see him in an on-screen relationship with a man. In particular, they wanted to see him with strong and brave, here to save the American way. I apologize for naming this section after an R. Kelly song. James Buchanan Barnes, incidentally named after the US president most historians believe to have been gay, was the childhood best friend of Steve Rogers. Most of their on-screen interactions read as romantic to a lot of fans, and so they thought the logical progression of this relationship was to end with them getting together. So they were sorely disappointed when Steve decided to return to the 1940s and live out the rest of his days with Peggy Carter, his first love interest, leaving Bucky behind in the modern day. I'm with you till the end of the line, until I can get my dick wet. I'm not here to debate the end of Steve's arc. Like, Chris Evans' contract was up, Sam Wilson was due to become the new Cap. It had to end some way. Regardless of how Steve felt about Bucky, a lot of fans see Bucky as queer and having been in love with Steve. There is a lot of queerness about this friendship. Steve and Bucky were from Brooklyn, which in the 1940s was the center of queer culture in New York. Bucky calls Steve a punk, which back then was a slang term for effete gay man, essentially the 40s equivalent of a twink. And Steve and Bucky are just so devoted to each other, risking their lives for each other, always believing in each other. Steve gives up his shield, the symbol of his patriotism, not once, but twice, for Bucky. Bucky means more to him than the mantle of Captain America, his raison d'etre. And I'm with you to the end of the line isn't romantic necessarily, but it's the way Chris Evans and Sebastian Stan deliver the line that really cinches it.
I'm with you to the end of the line, pal.
'Cause I'm with you to the end of the line.
Do you have to say that like they're your wedding vows? Oh, also, Crossbones ships it.
You know I knew you. Pal, your buddy, your Bucky.
But the gayness doesn't end there for Bucky. Oh no, because then there's Marvel's most overt queer bait yet, The Falcon and the Winter Soldier. Many people claim that Bucky's bisexuality was made canon in the first episode of the show when mentioning to a woman he's on a date with that he's been trying online dating and that he's seen a lot of tiger photos. Which apparently is something that men tend to do on their dating profiles, which means that Bucky has his settings to show men's profiles. As I like to say to my cat, wow, that's a big stretch! Also, director Carrie Skoglund outright denied that they were trying to make Bucky bi, so. The second episode seems designed to tease Bucky and Sam Wilson, complete with a literal roll in a field of flowers and couples counseling in which Bucky and Sam scissor each other and stare into each other's eyes. See, it's funny because we're utilizing romantic tropes and imagery for a relationship between two men because gay relationships are a source of comedy, never meant to be taken seriously. By the way, Bucky ends up with Sam's sister. Now, I'm not saying Bucky had to date a guy, since obviously bisexuals are attracted to women as well as men, but you have this character that you know so many fans see as queer, you purposely lean into queer subtext to entice those fans, and still, Bucky remains in the closet. If you don't want Bucky to be queer, stop coding him as such. But all of that is nothing in comparison to Captain Carter. Let me say right now that Peggy Carter is one of my favorite characters in the MCU, period. So I don't want to hear anything about me just hating Peggy because she gets in the way of Stucky. I was actually really excited when I heard they were going to do a cartoon about her getting the super serum. But something about it felt familiar.
Peggy? Wow.
Steve, I thought you were smaller.
Let's hear it for Captain Carter!
Let's hear it for Captain America!
You're more than the suit. The suit is nothing without the man inside. You're my hero, Steve.
Fellow guy from Brooklyn who was too dumb not to run away from a fight. I'm following him.
So basically they took all these moments from the first Avenger that were between Steve and Bucky, copy-pasted them into Captain Carter, but then turned them into scenes between Steve and Peggy. So let me see if I understand this. The same exact scenes weren't romantic when they were between two dudes, but they are romantic if they're between a het couple. Interesting. It's almost like Disney knows how blatantly romantic Steve and Bucky's friendship was, but since gays gross them out, they just take the same exact moments and turn them hetero. And that's how you gaslight an entire fan base. Okay, enough about Bucky Barnes. Who's next? Why did I say it like that? The Loki series made waves when Loki came out as the first openly bi character in the MCU. In a scene between himself and his alternate self, Sylvie, Loki mentioned that when it came to being in relationships, he'd been with people of multiple genders.
A bit of both.
A lot of people were dissatisfied with this, as they felt that Marvel should have put their money where their mouth is and put Loki in a relationship with a man. Specifically Owen Wilson's character Mobius, who serves as Loki's sidekick of sorts in the show. Instead, Loki ended up falling for Sylvie. You know, the girl version of himself. Marvel did self-cest before they did a same-sex relationship. Personally speaking, I do not care. Loki being in a relationship with a woman doesn't make him any less queer, and Loki falling for an alternate version of himself, while very, very weird, works thematically of Loki's arc of self-actualization. Loki is literally learning how to love himself. I'm not saying I'm a Lil V shipper or anything. I'm just saying it's not the sign of the end times that people are acting like it is. I may be in the minority here, but Loki is a legitimate bi representation in my book. I'm more interested in the gender fluid aspect of Loki. See, Loki, both in the comics and in Norse mythology itself, is a character who sometimes identifies as a man, and sometimes doesn't. Loki is a shapeshifter. He can take whatever form he wants. For example, one time in mythology, Loki took the form of a female horse, got f***ed by a male horse, and gave birth to a foal. But while Loki doesn't identify as a horse when he's in horse form, while he's in lady form, she does identify as a woman. Her character in the comics is called Lady Loki. At one point, Odin refers to Loki as my child who is both my son and my daughter. Loki being gender fluid is nothing new, even though he's always presented as male in the MCU. In Loki, the series, Loki's TVA file is briefly shown, and under sex, it's labeled fluid. In the show, there are many different Loki variants, Lokis from different timelines, all of whom, except for Sylvie, present as male. At no point does Loki Prime ever identify as anything other than male. Sylvie is presented as an aberration of sorts, not as Loki presenting as female, but rather as an alternate version of Loki altogether. Loki brings up Sylvie to several other male Loki variants, and they act like the idea is weird. Sylvie doesn't even go by the name Loki, getting angry when she's referred to as such. I don't think the writers understand what gender fluidity is. Gender fluidity isn't like, I'm male in this universe and female in another. It's not like the mirror universe for gender. I appreciate them at least trying to depict Loki's non-binary identity, but just once, talk to an actual non-binary person, please. At the end of the day, though, I think a well-intentioned, if slightly botched attempt at representation is better than just straight-up erasure or shameless queerbaiting. Back in 2020, Kevin Feige confirmed that Eternals, coming out later this year, would contain the first same-sex kiss in the MCU. Of course, knowing Disney, it'll be some extras in the background we'll see for 0.2 seconds. Or maybe the MCU really has learned from its past mistakes and is ready to start taking actual risks. With the acquisition of Fox, Disney now owns the rights to even more Marvel characters. We may someday see the Avengers team up with the X-Men, or even Deadpool. God, I shudder to think how Disney is gonna sanitize Deadpool. Ryan Reynolds, please deliver us. America Chavez, a canonical lesbian, is supposed to appear in Doctor Strange in the Multiverse of Madness. Tom Holland apparently wants Peter Parker to be bisexual. We all know how well that worked out for Andrew Garfield. I guess what I'm saying is that it's time for the MCU to stop playing it safe and start giving us some actual queer representation. I said after Endgame that I was done with Marvel, and it seems like somehow I keep getting roped back in, because Marvel is just that ubiquitous. You can't escape it. So, I'm going to be cautiously optimistic about the future. Don't bite me in the ass, Disney.